Think about the last time you heard someone say, "I can't leave the house without my face on," in reference to their makeup. It's such a familiar line, isn't it? But what's fascinating is how new that feeling actually is, because yes, eye makeup has a history stretching back thousands of years, full of ritual and artistry. But the idea that eye makeup is something that we have to wear, well, that's a far more recent invention. And when you look at the long sweep of beauty history and then hit the moment in the 20th century when mascara became an everyday basic, you suddenly see how quickly self-expression hardened into expectation. And most of us have never paused to ask how we got here. And I'm picking up this topic after last week's interview with Dr. Pam Theriault, in which we talked about the potential impact of personal care products, specifically those applied around the eyes, on our eye health. And in that interview, and go and listen to it if you haven't heard it yet, Pam told me that she regularly hears those infamous words, "I can't leave the house without my face on." And I've heard many people say that over the years too. So today I want to take you on a journey through the history of eye makeup, because it helps explain why so many people now feel naked without their makeup on. After all, that statement, "I can't leave the house without my face on," well, it didn't come from biology, it didn't even come from necessity. It came from a very particular moment in beauty culture that we are still living through. So let's delve back into the history books for this week's episode, and let's place our modern beauty culture in a historical perspective to see whether we've always felt this way about our eye makeup. I love geeking out on beauty industry history, and I hope that you'll come along with me for the ride. Hi, it's Lorraine Dallmeier, chartered environmentalist, biologist, and the CEO of the award-winning online organic cosmetic formulation school, Formula Botanica. I host the Green Beauty Conversations podcast, which has had well over 1 million global downloads. And these are my green beauty opinions, where I challenge you to think differently about the beauty industry. If you love hearing my thoughts on green beauty, make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. So let's go back, way back to the earliest records we have of eye makeup. In fact, 5,000 years ago in ancient Egypt is where we start. And at this point, both men and women lined their eyes with kohl. Now, I'm not talking about coal, the stuff you burn, but kohl, K-O-H-L, the deep soot-like paste made from ground minerals that carried spiritual and practical and cultural meaning. And this eye makeup was meant to be protective and ceremonial and symbolic. Kohl was believed to guard against the harsh desert sun, and it was thought to even ward off illness or evil spirits. It also elevated your social status. And similar practices appeared in Mesopotamia and Persia and the Indus Valley, where people decorated their eyes for similar reasons. Now, it's worth noting that eye makeup may have existed before this time, but these are the first records we have of it, at least that I'm aware of. So let's now take a giant leap forward in the history books and move to ancient Rome. And we now see that the mood changes entirely. So eye makeup existed, but it carried a very different meaning. Romans preferred subtle definition rather than drama. They liked a light line made from soot or antimony, which was a mineral that was ground into a fine dark powder. They also liked soft mineral pigments on the lids, and darkened brows were acceptable too. But anything too bold was linked to performers or courtesans. Heavy eyeliner could even attract moral judgment. And for Roman women, applying makeup to their eyes was a balancing act. Don't enhance your eyes too much and don't appear artificial. And I think at this point, it's a perfect reminder that women have been judged on their appearance for millennia, and we can't get it right, whatever we do. So by the Middle Ages, beauty ideals in Europe had shifted dramatically. Teachings from the Christian church placed enormous value on modesty and moral purity. I have so much to say on this, but that's a different podcast. And that translated into the idea that a so-called good woman should look natural and untouched. Perhaps not quite so different from some of the rather toxic conversations that play out on social media nowadays, which I'm sure you've probably seen too. So cosmetics were viewed with suspicion, sometimes even condemned as sinful. And pale skin, unpainted features, and an eye area without makeup became markers of virtue. So using colourful makeup around the eyes would have been unthinkable for many European women, not because pigments were unavailable, but because doing so risked signalling vanity or impropriety. And again, there's that judgment. But I think it's really important to say at this point that this wasn't a universal experience, because the rest of the world continued very differently. So in India and the Middle East and North Africa, kohl use continued uninterrupted for thousands of years. In China and Japan, eye aesthetics evolved with pigments and brow styling, and across other parts of Africa and South America, ceremonial pigments and mineral-based eye decorations carried cultural, spiritual, and protective meanings that never disappeared. So while medieval Europe represented a complete reversal from the expressive rituals of the ancient world, much of the globe continued to celebrate the eyes in really rich and visible and meaningful ways. But as time passed, the focus remained firmly on skin rather than eyes. So women were continuously expected to have pale complexions and flushed cheeks and tidy brows. These took center stage while the eye area stayed mostly bare. By the 18th century, the French and English courts were experimenting with powdered faces. I'm sure you've seen the pictures of the sort of white powdered faces and painted lips. But even then, obvious eye makeup was unusual. And I think the real turning point didn't arrive until the late 1800s when photography, the global ingredient trade, and an emerging commercial cosmetics market began reshaping beauty expectations. This was the birth of the mainstream beauty industry, really. And then it was only really with the arrival of cinema in the early 20th century and the close-up that eye makeup finally stepped back into the global spotlight, because suddenly faces were being captured and magnified and scrutinized. Film studios needed actors whose eyes stood out on screen, so mascara and eyeliner gained momentum. Now pair that with another really important shift which came with the electrification of homes and the arrival of better mirrors in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. For most of history, people simply didn't see their own faces in bright, even light. Isn't that a bizarre thought? We're so used to having mirrors everywhere now. Imagine not being able to see yourself properly until one day the lights go on, giving you the ability to inspect your entire face. And that changed how people groomed themselves. And it made eye makeup easier to apply and to judge. So at this point, people really started experimenting. Mascara became a so-called everyday basic by the 1950s. It was the thing you were supposed to reach for before you left the house. And there's the beginning of that mantra, I can't leave the house without my face on. And then the colors arrived. Vivid blues and purples and greens splashed across the 1980s. And the 90s blurred everything again with that lived-in grunge smudge. I vividly remember mooching around school with heavy black eyes in my heavy metal t-shirts before the smoky eye took over in the 2000s, and it made makeup all about depth and shadow. And then social media arrived, and the Instagram eye was invented, with razor-sharp wings and cut creases and sculpted brows. These artists were turning the eyelid into a tiny stage. And it's so weird, isn't it, when you think about it? Because after centuries of bare eyes across Europe, the 20th and early 21st centuries didn't just bring eye makeup back. They made it one of the fastest moving, most expressive parts of Western European beauty culture. Which brings us neatly to today. Because eye makeup, which for most of human history was optional or symbolic, is now often treated as a necessity around the world. And people across the world say, I can't go out without mascara or my face on. I don't look like myself without eyeliner. And I've thought that too. These are very contemporary sentiments. But it's interesting when you consider that a medieval woman wouldn't have understood these thoughts. And that, to me, is the most fascinating part of all of this. Because what we now consider normal emerged from technology, photography, marketing, Hollywood, and then later social media, all of which shaped a set of beauty expectations that simply didn't exist before. And we internalize those expectations so deeply that many people now treat them as personal truths rather than cultural trends. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not an argument against makeup. Far from it. Because as you've heard already in the podcast so far, humans have been decorating their eyes for thousands of years, and I find that history beautiful and wonderful. And eye makeup can be art and play and identity, rebellion, confidence, creativity, all wonderful things. What I'm challenging is the shift from I enjoy this to I must do this, taking eye makeup from expression to expectation. And when you look at the long arc of history, you realize how new that expectation really is. The idea that we must present a particular version of our eyelids to the world every day is not ancient wisdom or cultural heritage. It's barely a century old. It's a modern construct, and remembering that gives you permission to rethink your own relationship with eye makeup. Now, let's not forget when Pamela Anderson went viral in 2023. So she was attending Paris Fashion Week and she wore no makeup. And this shouldn't be the sort of news that makes headlines, as billions of us go without makeup every single day. But it was so unusual to see a famous woman, especially one so strongly associated with a certain beauty aesthetic, and she chose bare skin and bare eyes. So the media stopped and stared, and their reaction said everything. And it proved how tightly we've wrapped up identity and femininity and professionalism around the idea of a done eye, and how refreshing, even liberating it feels when someone steps outside of that expectation. And it isn't just celebrities who feel this pressure either. Fascinatingly, several studies have looked at how women are judged in professional settings based on how much makeup they wear. And the results are honestly shocking. One well-known experiment found that women wearing a moderate amount of makeup were rated as more competent, more likable, and more trustworthy than the exact same women with bare faces. Yet when the makeup was judged as too heavy, those ratings dropped sharply. Another study showed that a woman's leadership potential was perceived differently depending solely on whether she defined her eyes or not. I can't even wrap my head around this. Imagine that. The tiniest sweep of mascara or liner quietly influencing whether someone is seen as capable. It is an astonishing reminder that what we treat as just makeup often carries far more cultural weight than we realize. So where does that leave all of us? Well, you can participate. You can opt out. You can switch styles. You can go bare. You can go bold. You can go subtle. You can do anything you want, because eye makeup has never been fixed. It has always shifted with culture, and it will shift again. Today's false lashes and cat eyes will one day be viewed as fascinating artifacts of a very specific moment. It'll be photographed in the history books. And maybe that's the most radical thing we can do in a world obsessed with performance. Remember that our faces don't owe anyone a storyline. The eyes you woke up with are enough, and anything you add is creativity, not obligation. Eye makeup isn't a test of professionalism or womanhood or worth. It's a trend, a tool, a toy, a piece of culture we can pick up or put down whenever we like. And the moment we stop treating it as compulsory is the moment that we get our autonomy back. Thank you for listening to my Green Beauty Opinions. Remember to visit the Formula Botanica website at formulabotanica.com to try our free online formulation course. And if you haven't subscribed yet to the Green Beauty Conversations podcast, please do so now in your favorite podcast app. Leave me a 5-star review if you enjoy these discussions and opinions. I'll be back soon with my next episode.